Today we're going to start Mem Amud Beis. That's 40b. We'll start from the Mishnah. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day. It's chassav our learning. Hashem to Beis Hamikdash immediately. The Mishnah starts Kol Makom sheyesh mecher in knas. That means if the girl is of such a young age that she's able to be sold as a maidservant, that means she's under 12. At that point, there's no knas. That means if she's raped or seduced, the knas only begins between 12 and 12 and a half, according to this opinion that we're following in the Mishnah. And if there is the knas is the fine that's imposed on the individual that raped or seduced this girl. That means she's in between 12 and 12 and a half. Then ein mecher. At that point, she can't be sold anymore. We said that if she was sold previously, when she reaches age 12, she goes out. So she can't be sold after that. Ketana, the Mishnah spells it out. Yesh lamecha vein laknas. A minor under 12 years old can be sold as a maidservant, but she doesn't get the fine. And the father doesn't get the fine if she's raped. And Nara, when she's 12, in between 12 and 12 and a half, yesh laknas vein lamecha. Then she gets the fine, father, but can't be sold. Too old to be sold as a maidservant. And when she's 12 and a half, the begeres, then she doesn't have either the selling or the knas. We start the Gemara. Rav Yehuda Rav Yehuda says in the name of his teacher Rav Zudivri Reb Meir that our Mishnah is the words of Reb Meir. There's not much of a chiddush in this Mishnah. It just organizes it for us. I mean, I think we learned all of that before, and especially now that Rav Yehuda Marav says that this is only one opinion, we've got the whole thing. The Chachamim say yesh laknas b'makom mecher, that there is the fine even at the age when she's able to be sold, which means the fine really begins from 3 years old, according to the Chachamim. Once she's 3, then the relations is considered the relations, and so therefore the fine starts back then, and it goes until 12 and a half. That's the sages' view. The Tanya was taught in Braisa. If there's a girl that's 1 day old, just born, and until she has 2 pubic hairs, I mean she's 12, she could be sold as a maidservant, but she doesn't have the fine of if she was raped or seduced. Once she's 12 years old, then until she's 12 and a half, she has the fine, but she can't be sold anymore. Reb Meir, that's what Reb Meir holds. So Reb Meir Aimer, because Reb Meir would say that they're exclusive. When this applies, this doesn't apply. When this applies, that doesn't apply. This is until 12, and this is after 12. The Chachamim say starting from 3 years old and a day. Until 12 and a half. Goes straight through the 12-year line. Yesh laknas. She has the fine. Umar says, knasin mechalai. What do you mean? Only the knas? What about her being sold? He left out like that was the obvious one. Umar says, you're right. Ema af knas b'makom mecher. It means also the fine. Even though she's being sold. She could be sold. So she can have both in between 3 and 12. Amar Chisda. Chisda says, my time with the Reb Meir. What's the reason for Reb Meir's view that says that it stops at 12? Both stop at 12. Amar Rav Chisda, my time with the Reb Meir. Amar Kra. The pasuk says, "V'leisia liisha." One of the rules is that if he raped the girl, he has to stay with her as his wife forever. And he also has the fine to pay. Well, when it says the word tia, or sia, when it says sia, that's referring to marriage. The Gemara a lot of them calls havaya sheshba, this and that. Havaya, mahava means is the word that's used for marriage. So we're talking about that she's able to marry herself off. She's at the age of marriage. She can marry herself off, not the age that her father's selling her. That's the case, then she's already 12. For Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan say? They have an interesting answer. Amr Shlakish, Amar Kra. Now, the following word in my Gemara says Nara with a hey. The Bach adjusts it that it's actually referring to the word Nara without a hey. If you look in the Chumash, there's always, when it says the word Nara, it's almost always without the hey. And it says it just with the commas at the end of a word, which is unique for our Hebrew spelling. Usually we have, at the end of a word with the commas, usually we put the hey there. The hey doesn't really change that sound at all. The sound is the same with the hey, without the hey. I think they call it in the grammar world, they call it a mater lectionis or something. But, yeah. I think achrimais. Well, whatever the case is, it says over here Nara without a hey. The fact that it says Nara without a hey, the question is how the Gemara gets to this. Gemara says afilu ktana b'mashma. It means even if she's under 12. Possibly the way the Gemara gets to this is that the spelling of the word Nara is the same as the spelling of the word Nar, which means a lad, as opposed to the young girl. Now, Nara with the hey would mean that she's developed enough that it's clear that she's a girl. Nar means a lad, but Nara without the hey would mean that she's not fully developed, and so therefore she could even be. You don't see the distinction between the female and the male right away, and that's why it would be even as a katana. It's referring to even the katana. That could be the pshat, and it was the development of. Okay. Well, you hear what Rish Lakish is saying. What's the reason for the Rabbanan? That the Rabbanan say that the knas applies even under 12 years old? Because the pasuk says Nara without a hey. Yeah. Summer of Papa, Raider of Chanan, Mibei Kluchis. Rav Papa, the son of Rav Chanan from Beit Kluchis, heard this. Well, Azal Amra Kameder of Simi Barashi. He went and he goes and he tells it to Rav Simi Barashi. I don't know where Rav Simi Barashi is on the chart. This one? No, it's not going to help. Okay, I'll check it up. Google it. Found it over there. Okay. Let's see, now this is the Tanaim. Is there another one there? The whole thing. Okay. There, Rav Simi Barashi is actually a student, not a student of Rav Papa, but he's in the generation of Rav Papa students. He's late, yeah. It's not like Rav Chia Barashi, that was a student of Rav. This is Rav Simi Barashi. It's like above Ravashi. Simi Barashi. Okay, so he goes and he tells it over to him. Amarle, apparently, Rav Simi Barashi responds. He says, Atun, you, aha masnisala, you learned, Rish Lakish was answering up a question that you had on this Mishnah, this Brisa, that what do the Rabbanan hold about, but what's the source of the Rabbanan that a girl under 12 has a knas? However, Anan, we learned it on something else. Rish Lakish says, Amitzi Shemra al-Katan is pater. Amitzi Shemra is when a man gets married, and immediately after the marriage, he says that his wife was not a virgin, and she must have had the relations in between the betrothal and the wedding, and she's deserving of the death penalty. And we find out that he's lying. So what happens is he has to pay 100 coins, not 50. He has to pay 100 coins to the girl's father. Now, at what age does this take place. So Rish Lakish says, that if she's under 12 years old, he's pater. Shnemar, v'nasnu lavi hanara, nara malay dibrakasav. Over there, it says that it says that's like the one place where it says nara with the hay, nara with the hay. So over there, it means that she needs to be developed. That means she's over 12, not under 12. The halacha of Meitzi Shemra, he's also not about a divorcer, is that it's over 12 because of the hay. See, that's where Rish Lakish really said it. Rada Barava has a question. Time with the Kasar Rachman and Nara. You're telling me that the whole halacha of Meitzi Shemra is because it says Nara with the hay, and that means it's over 12. If not so, I mean, I feel like Tana, you would have said that it applies even to a young girl. If not for that, hey, there's a problem. But the pasuk says that, let's say it's true what the person claimed. She's going to get stoned. How does she get stoned? She's under 12. There's no capital punishment. There's no bezdin punishments under bar mitzvah, bar or bas mitzvah. Gemara says no. What's really happening here is a kan nara. Here it's telling me that she's over 12, and it uses the word nara. But what it's really telling me is that hakol makom shneimar nara afilu ketana b'mashma. It's really telling me what's implied from that is that if it doesn't say nara with the hay, then it's coming to tell me that it's also works by. Then it's also under 12 is also applicable, those halachas. The word nara without the hay, what it's really teaching me by the Meitzi Shemra is that under 12, it doesn't apply to the Meitzi Shemra, but every other place in the Torah under 12, where it says nara without the hay, it's referring to under 12 as well. Okay. Now we enter into a sugya, which is, I think, like a Baba Kama sugya over here. It's called Maida B'Knas. If someone, or use Maida, let's say it like that. Maida, if he admits, B'Knas Pater, he's exempt from the Knas. Yeah, not Maida to the Knas. He's Maida, and then B'Knas Pater. He's exempt from the Knas. So it goes like this. If someone comes along to Bezdin, and he admits something that he did, he says, Patiti Espiti Shalplaini. I seduced someone's daughter. So he's admitting to a crime that he committed. So Mishalim Baishas, Upagam al Piatzmai. So he has to pay for the embarrassment that he caused, and he also has to pay for the Pagam, the blemish. That means her decrease of value as a maidservant, what we learned yesterday. Vein Mishalim Knas, but he doesn't have to pay the Knas. The Knas was the 50 coins. Why? Because he admitted on his own. The rule is that if someone admits that he owes money, so if it's an actual money that needs to be paid up because of a damage or something, then he has to pay it. But if it's a fine that's imposed on him, then he can get out of the fine by admitting on his own without the best in catching him. If he admits on his own, he doesn't have to pay the fine. Yeah. What happens? That's a whole sugya. If witnesses come later, they just like it was a race to the court. Who could, So, but let's say there's no witnesses. We only know this through him. He doesn't have to pay.
In what context is that? If he admits,
he's admitting that he seduced the girl.
Okay, so that's not just for seduction, though.
So he doesn't have to pay the fine, but it would apply to other cases as well.
Okay.
Let's say he says he stole. Comes in, he says, I stole. Okay, what did you steal? So whatever it is, Mishalim Mesakeren, Alpiatzme, Vena Mishalim Karen, Mishalim Kefal, Tashlumi Abava Chamisha. He pays the principal value of what he stole, but doesn't have to pay the double, which is when someone steals. He also doesn't have to pay the 4 and 5 times because all of that is a fine. And we only know this from him. He's the one that's okay. He says that my ox killed so and so. Now there's a rule, it's called kaifer. Kaifer is if an ox kills a man, the owner of the ox does not get the death penalty, but he does have a fine that he has to pay because he didn't watch his ox. The ox caused that. He has to pay the value of either himself or the value of the victim. Yeah, it's a discussion. So, like it's 10-9, I think. So that is a fine. Sorry, that is not a fine. That is not a fine. That he's actually paying the value, that's not a fine. If it's the value of the other one, of the victim, it's not a fine. Hey, Miss Shari Avde shall play me. Let's say he says, my ox killed someone's slave. Now, the rule here is that if an ox kills a slave, talking about a non-Jewish slave, the owner of the ox has to pay 30 silver coins. It's a flat fee. So, ein mashalem al piatzmi, that he doesn't have to pay because he admitted to it. And because it's a flat fee, obviously it's not the actual value. So it could be even more than the person's value. So that's considered a fine. Anyone that has to pay more than the damages, he doesn't pay on his own admission. Right? Okay, the Gemara asks right away on the Mishnah of Elisni Anasti. When it says, the Mishnah started, it said, a person admits that he seduced a girl. Why doesn't it say he admits that he raped the girl? It says, Laimi Bai Kama. It says, that's not the Chiddush. We're telling you even a bigger Chiddush. Why? Laimi Bai Anasti Dleika Pagamla. He's not saying anything bad about her when he says Anasti. He's not saying that she's a promiscuous girl. He's not saying that she was seduced and she agreed and consented. I think he raped her. It's all his. He's the bad guy in the whole picture. So not only when he says Anasti, that he does not cause any blemish to her reputation. There's no blemish to her reputation. The Mishalim Baishas Begam al Piatzmai that he has to pay. The Baishas Begam on his own, Al Aval Patiti the Kapagamla. But when he says, I seduced her, when he does this, he's causing damage to her reputation. Maybe we shouldn't believe him. Maybe you shouldn't pay. When you're taking the money, you're believing him that he did this. He's coming in and telling us that that this girl is not a good girl. So why should we believe him? Kamash Malan comes to tell us that we do believe him. That's a chiddush. I could have thought the chiddush was the other way. We believe him even though he says that he's a bad guy. But whatever the case is, either way, there's a chiddush in this, and that's why it said it like that. The Mishnah is not following a certain Tana. The Tani was taught in the Brayso. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon, the son of Yehuda, says in the name of Reb Shimon, that's Reb Shimon bar Yochai here, Af Baishas Begam Eina Mishalem al Piatzmei. Says that he doesn't even pay the embarrassment or the pagam or decrease of value when he admits on its own. We can't just trust him that he's to cast to make this reputation some girl's reputation just because of his own claim, his own admission. Amalei Rav Papa Abaya. Rav Papa asked Abaya. Abaya is the teacher of Rav Papa. He says, "Nichala l'didamai." What would Reb Shimon say if she needs the money? She wants the money. So why can't we believe him? So the Gemara says, our Abaya responds, it's not good for her family. The father is going to be embarrassed that look at what my daughter did. The Gemara says, well, let's say the father needs the money. Money goes to the father. Okay. What about the larger family? It's an embarrassment to the larger family. Let's say the larger family also needs the money. There's got to be someone that does not want the name going out that such and such a family has a girl that's promiscuous. Okay. If someone says I stole, he has to pay the principal, not the double. Okay, we enter into this, it's a sugya in Baba Kama. Itmar, stated by Amoraim, there's a machlekes Amoraim. Palganiska. The rule is like this, that if there's an ox that gored 3 times, at that point, then it has to pay full price. But in the first 2 times, it has to pay
Damages.
half the damages. Only half the damages. Question is, how do we look at that half the damages? Do we say that really he should be paying whole damages, but we go easy on him? And that means that it's considered the principal payment. But do we say that he really doesn't have to pay anything, but we're being tough on him, so we should watch his ox?
Half is just principal.
Half of the principal. Let's say an ox worth 200 goes an ox that's worth 200. Now it's worth nothing. So you only have to pay 100. Okay. The value of the first ox is relevant. So we'll see. Right. You only get half the money. So the question is, let's take a look. Rav Papa Amar Palganiskam Amayna. Rav Papa says, really, this is a principal payment. He's paying for the value. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Amar Palganiska Knasa. It's not really a principal payment. It's a fine. It's only paying half the value. Half the value means that it's not paying for the principal. It's just a fine that the sages imposed on him, that he should watch his animal. Rav Papa Amar Palganiska Mamayna. Rav Papa says that it's considered Mamayna. It's paying for the principal. He holds that really an ox needs to be watched. And the payment of damages is really because of negligence. And since the ox needs to be watched, and here there was negligence because you didn't watch the ox. But the Mishalim Kula, really, you should have to pay everything. Rachmano the Eberster with compassion on this fellow. We know that it was a good ox. It was a tam, it was a tame ox. And Tura is ox, is short, tough in the shin. The yayid means it wasn't muad. It means it wasn't, I don't know if it comes from the word testified or designated. It wasn't testified. How do they translate it? It wasn't yayid.
Forewarned.
Forewarned. Okay. Yeah, I'm still not sure what the root is. Well, the responsibility was on the owner to watch it, and we're just relieving him of half the payment, but really he should be paying the whole thing. So it's considered a memina. It's a principal payment it's a restitution. It's not a fine that's imposed, right? Rav Huna Breder Rabbi Shua Amar Palganiska Knasa. Rav Huna Breder Shua says no, it's a fine. There's no negligence here. An ox can walk around. It's a tame ox. It doesn't go and gore. It's an abnormal goring. It's not like it ate vegetables. Ox is going to eat vegetables. It's going to eat grass. It's going to eat that. But here it gored. This doesn't do this. It was such an abnormal thing that you don't have to say that you have to pay. It was negligence. You shouldn't have to pay anything. Brachmano the Kanse, the Abish to put a knasa fine. Kechem did an laturi that he should watch it better. They put a fine on him. From now on he should watch it. But originally, there wasn't such a big deal. Didn't have to watch it.
I always had the impression that axes were somewhat violent. Isn't that what the Spanish people ran away from?
That's when you make them violent.
Oh.
With the red cloth and all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are these actually neutered? In other words, we have.
Not that I know of, because the Torah doesn't allow
It
that.
doesn't allow it, right?
Right.
Because the bull, that animal normally is a wild type animal. That's the ones that fight in the bullfight. But all the steers and all these in the cowboy movies, those are all neutered, so that they don't not so aggressive.
No,
But these guys,
those animals in the bullfights Those have a different halacha. Those are muad mitchilasi. Those are always considered muad. Yeah, there's a mission in Baba Kama. What's it called? Sharet Stadin, I think it's called. That's a wild animal. Yeah, this is different.
Domestic animals you can't neuter.
No, we don't neuter any animals.
Oh, so it's like a wild dog. A dog in the wilderness becomes like a wolf,
Right.
but in the house he's a nice little simple animal. It doesn't bite you normally.
Is that how it works? That because they're in the wilderness, they're more wild?
They learn how to survive, but yeah, they're not tame.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I didn't realize that's what it was. I thought it was the breeding of it. I didn't realize it was the nurture. Uh-huh. Okay.
They wouldn't survive in the wilderness.
Yeah, I understand that.
If he's surviving in the wilderness, he's a wild dog.
Uh-huh. So now we're going to try to prove who's correct. Rav Papa, Rav Unabed, Rav Yeshua, regarding half the payment of a tame animal that has to pay for damages. Is it considered a principal payment? Or is it considered a fine? Considered restitution?
It's the same amount, it's just the
the same amount.
else.
Yeah. What's the difference if it's a knas? Well, for us, there's a huge difference.
Why?
If you can collect it.
Yes, question here, is it a knas that the Rabbanim produced? Or is it a fine that the Rabbanim imposed in the first place?
Yeah. Is it mamain? Is it mamain means that it would be a reduced payment? Or is it a knas that's just an original fine? Yeah. Okay, so Simon Hezek Ma, the Hamas Klal, I guess that's going to be the Simon for these prices that are coming up. I'm going to try to prove what the half payment is. Tanan. Start in the Mishnah. Hanizik v'amazik b'tashlumin. We have a Mishnah that says that both the victim and the one that caused the damage are involved in the payment. Well, what's going on over here? When you're paying half, both involved in the payments, right? If we say that really there should have been a full payment, but they reduced it to half, that's how the victim is part of the payment, because he was supposed to get the whole payment and he's only getting half. So he's part of the payment. In other words, he is also contributing to this loss. But if we say it's a fine, that means really the nizik doesn't get anything. Right? The nizik is the victim. He doesn't get anything. He's the 50% payment that he's getting is not, he's not really deserving of anyway. You see, the fine is imposed on the perpetrator to be more careful. Who do we give it to? We'll give it to the guy, to the victim. But the main point of the fine is to stop the guy from doing it, not to support the victim's loss. So if he really wasn't deserving anything after that loss, so he's not contributing to the payment by taking 50%, taking only 50%. He's not contributing at all. He's getting 50%. That's he's not bitashlumin. Gemara says leinitzchal pchas nevela. Actually, you got it wrong. It wasn't talking about the 50% that each one is contributing. That would have been a proof that Palganiskam minor of Papa would be right. But really what we're talking about here is that the carcass of the animal has a little bit of value. Now that value is obviously can't be eaten by Jewish people because it wasn't shechted, but it could be have value to the person's dogs or other animals that want to eat this meat. Well, you got to take it to and sell it. What happens if the animal is worth 200, the carcass is worth 50? You come to court. Yeah, come to court, and there's they estimate what's the value of the loss. It's $150.
I understand the value. It's the value of the damage or the value of the animal itself.
Now they're with the value of the damage,
Okay.
because we're taking the carcass into account. So the carcass still has a $50 value. So because it can be sold as dog food or something, I don't know. So what are we left with? What's the remaining? What's the balance here? It's 150. You know, it turns out that in between, so the fellow's going to have to pay 75, but it turns out that in between, at the time of the damage, and in between they stand in court, the value of the carcass gets worth less. That means that when do we evaluate the carcass? We evaluate as it was at the time of damage, not at the time that they stood in court. So there was a decrease since then. In that decrease, this fellow loses, the victim loses. He only gets 75, even though when he stood in court, it was maybe only worth 25. It was only worth 25. Should be getting another 12 and a half, right? Okay. So it's talking about a different sort of tashlumin, a different sort of loss that he's incurring, and it doesn't have to do with the fact that he should really be getting the whole thing. Okay, the Gemara says 1 second. That's what it's talking about. Pchas nevela tanina. I have another Mishnah that says that talks about the pchas nevela, the decrease of value of the carcass. Tashlumi nezek. It says in the Mishnah that when it comes to paying for damages, that means that the victim, the owner of the animal, has to take care of the carcass. Where it says, well, what I'll explain is, why does it have to say it twice? Once by hanizik v'mazik v'tashlumin, that they're both involved in the payment. Another one that the owner has to take care of the carcass is chada b'tam v'chada b'muad. One is talking about a tame animal, and one is talking about a muad animal. B'tzricha, and we have to tell me both. The Yashmin and Tam, if it would only tell me about the Tam, the tame animal, that the owner is the one that's losing out of this, he has to take care of that, the carcass. Because it was a tame animal, it wasn't forewarned. But a muad that was already forewarned, I would say that that's not the case. 1 second. Why would I say that that's not the case? I would say that the owner of the perpetrator, the owner of that of the animal, of the aggressive animal, should have been more careful, and therefore we're going to put on him even the decrease of value of the carcass. He should have to pay for everything because he's really negligent on not guarding his animals. So we'll put on him the extra fee as well. I would have thought that. The Yashmin and Muad, and if it only would have told me the Muad, that the Muad does not have to pay that the decrease of value of the carcass, because he's paying everything anyway. So that's a big price. But by the time where he's only paying half, in Malay, I would say that maybe he should pay the decrease because he's only paying half. Going to take everything from the victim. The victim has to take care of the carcass, and he also has to loses half the payment. In Malay, I would say that not. So we need two brises, two mishnayos to tell me this. Okay, tzricha. Tashma. We have another source. We're going to try to figure out who's correct, or if Papa or Hunabed or Vishur regarding this half payment of the tame animal. Ma bin tam lamuad. What's the difference between a tame animal, the one that wasn't forewarned, didn't gore 3 times, and the muad, the one that gored 3 times and it was warned? The tame animal has to pay half the price from the value of the ox itself. So in other words, the ox that gored is worth 200, and the ox that it gored was worth 400. So the guy takes the ox itself as a payment. The victim takes the aggressor as his payment.
Whole animal?
Well, it's 200, it's half the price.
Yeah, but when you want a goring animal, it's a pet.
Well, it has a value.
So
Whatever the value is, it takes the value.
Point that the payment must come from that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can sell it, check it. But
Yeah.
it has to, so you get rid of this ox, even though it's a farm.
Well, it switches owners, possibly through being sold, shechted and sold, possibly just being sold and
for deterrent.
Yeah.
Keeps it as a working animal.
Right.
I don't see why he has to pay for half of the perpetrator's animal that did the damage. He has to pay that. He receives that value.
No, perpetrator has to pay.
Right.
Now, what does he pay with? The ox that he pays with that is with the ox.
His ox.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant.
No, in modern terms, it would be if someone was driving a Mercedes or something, and he hits a Ford. So the guy with the Ford says, "Okay, you give me the Mercedes,
Oh, really?
half the Mercedes, but it's only half the
It's
value
irrelevant.
of the Ford." Yeah, yeah, that could be part of it. Right, that could be
I
part
mean,
of it.
his car was the Ford.
What was it?
His car is the Ford. He should get like reimbursed for the loss. Of his
Yeah,
car.
he gets reimbursed, but from what
From a car that's not
merchandise
his.
he gets reimbursed from the perpetrator's ox. Yeah, unless you
I
otherwise I can
understand.
go to his real
Makes
estate.
sense.
Can I go to his real estate and take away his real estate because he owes me money for his ox? The rule is that I can't. But I have to take, in this case, I have to take migufa. I have to take from the
very ox itself.
from the very ox itself. However, muad, if it was an ox that was forewarned, that's a different story. That's mishalim nezek shalim min aliyah. He has to pay from the best. I can go to his merchant, not to his merchant. I can go to his property. I can take.
Own an
Yeah,
ox.
and not only from the property, I can take from his property that he owns in Manhattan. You don't have to take from Wyoming. You know,
It's the same value. I mean, we're going for value though.
I know it's the same value,
Right.
but there's an ease of usage.
In other words, I owe you $1 million. But you take it from a Miami estate, not the Wyoming estate.
Right. Right, it's easier to use. Yeah,
It's because he's super negligent.
yeah.
'Cause,
Because of that, that's what it sounds like. Okay, now this Mishnah missed out one important point. That it didn't say that if by a time if the owner of the ox admits to what his ox did,
Yeah.
that he shouldn't have to pay because it's only a knas, it's a fine. Yeah, if he admits to a fine,
He just is.
he's exempt.
exempt totally.
Exempt totally. Why didn't it say that? When you started to tell me differences between a tam and a muad, according to Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua, I have another difference, that it's a knas. But the fact that it didn't say it means Rav Papa's right. The Gemara says no, Tana v'shaya. The fact that it didn't say it was because it wasn't listing everything. It left out certain points. It wasn't giving you a whole, exhaustive list of every possible difference. It gave you a difference. Well, the Gemara says, well, my shaya, the high shaya. If that's the case, then it would have left out other things as well, not just one point. Just to leave out one point means that it's trying to tell you something, right? The Gemara says, well, shir chatzi kaifer. It was leaving out chatzi kaifer. What it means is like this. When an animal gores a man and kills him, so there's a payment that he has to pay. It's called kaifer. The value of the victim, let's say it's the value of the victim. Well, let's say it was a tame animal, it was the tam. Should have to pay half. But the rule is that he doesn't have to pay half. So if you want to know what's the difference between a tam and a muad, there's another difference, not just the half payment and where the payment comes from. And by the way, there's another difference that the Mishnah didn't say, that if he admits, he doesn't have to pay at all. But there's one more difference also, and that is that if it gores a man and it kills him, he doesn't have to pay half the kaifa, half of that value. So we left out two things, and that's why it makes sense that it could be left out. The Gemara says, that's not considered leaving out. Why? Because Hamani Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Maybe we're following the Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that we do pay half kaifa. that's the case, and we didn't leave out. We said you pay half. Okay. Toshima, come on, this is still not a proof. Okay. Toshima, come and listen. Hey, Misharius, Pliny, Shershal, Plinerism, Shalom al Piatzmi. We quote our Mishnah. He has to pay on his own admission. My ox killed so and so, or my ox gored another ox. He has to pay on his own admission. My love, is it not the tam? Why does he have to pay? We're dealing with a tame animal here, and he has to pay half the value. And it's following Rabbi Yossi Glili, I guess, when it comes to goring the man, the half the kaifer. You see, he has to pay on his own admission. Rav Papa's right. It's considered mammon. It's not considered a knas, or else it would be exempt. Gemara says, "Loi b'muad." The reason why he has to pay on his own admission is because it was forewarned 3 times. Everyone agrees that that's a real payment. It's the half price that's a machlokes. This we're not even discussing the half payment. Aval b'tamai, what would be by the tam? Eina mishalem al piatzmai. Maybe he doesn't have to pay on his own. Okay, he doesn't have to pay on his own. Why? Because Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua is right. Because it's considered a knas. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. If that's really what you want to say. The Tani Seifa. Let's go further. It says, Abdi shall play Neina Mishalem al Piatzmai. If he says my ox scored so and so slave, he doesn't have to pay on his own admission. Niflig v'nisni b'dida. If you're telling me a contrast between this animal and that animal, between this damages and those damages, you're telling me this one he pays on his own, and this one he doesn't pay on his own. So you told me that when it gores a man or gores an animal, he pays on his own, and when it gores a slave, it doesn't pay on his own. But when was all of this talking about? By a muad. If you wanted to tell me a contrast, you don't have to tell me that if he gores a slave, he doesn't pay on his own. Just switch the animal. Say it's a tam. And then even if it gores a man or if it gores another animal, he still doesn't have to pay because it's only chatzi nezek, and chatzi nezek is a knas. Let's divide that case itself into 2 parts, and we'll have the contrast of chayev and pater by the same case. When do we say that he pays on his own admission? That's only if it's a mur. But if it's a tam, doesn't pay on his own. My answer is kula b'mud kamairi. That's only if we're just looking for the difference of paying on his own. But that's not all we were doing here. We were discussing the payments of a muad. We weren't discussing a tam at all. You're saying, why don't you talk about a tam? That wasn't part of our Mishnah. We're just talking about the muad, and then in the muad itself, we have a contrast between what occurred. Tashima zeh klal. Come and listen. This is the rule. Anyone that pays more than the damages doesn't pay on his own admission, because that's obviously a fine, right? He's paying more. That's obviously a fine. He doesn't pay it on his own admission. But if it's less than the damages, he does have to pay on his own. See, chatzi nezek, half the payment of a tam, is considered mamain. Rav Papa's right. The Gemara says, don't say, but less. Don't use that implication, but less than the damages, he does have to pay. Rather say, it wasn't negating less than the damages, it was negating the amount of the damages. But what would be if it's less than the damages? That's a big question. Then he doesn't have to pay on his own admission. That's the case. And in other words, Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua is right. Listen, why doesn't it say it differently? It should say this is the rule. Whoever doesn't pay the exact amount of the damages doesn't pay on his own. Whether it's more or less, he doesn't pay on his own. Why didn't it say that? All it said was whoever pays more than the damages doesn't pay on his own admission. Really, it's not only more, it's even if it's less, he doesn't pay on his own admission. Well, the Gemara says that's not exactly accurate, because there are certain times that when he pays less, he still will pay. Okay, 1 second. The Gemara says, okay, that's a very good question. Tiyufta. It's a good question. So what's the halacha? The hilchasa, palga niska knasa. That it's a knas. 1 second. The question over here was that why didn't it say that if someone pays that, why didn't it say that only if he pays exactly the amount is it considered mammon, but if he pays more or less, then it's considered a knas? Why didn't it say that? It must be because when it pays more, it's a knas. When it pays less, it's mammon. So we basically concluded that paying less, chatzi nezek, is mammon. We concluded that Rav Papa was correct. Then the Gemara says, okay, the halacha is Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua is correct. Gemara says, 1 second. You have a strong question, and then you tell me the halacha is different. Can you tell me that that's the halacha anyway? Yes. Time of what was the reason why you had this question? Because it didn't say that if it damages the amount of the damage. So why didn't it say that? It wasn't exactly precise. Why? We do have one example of half payment that we know for sure is mammon. The hilchas gemir la de mamainahu. Mammon is principal payment, not fine. The word mammon means money. It's just a money payment. It's not a fine payment. Mishamachi like Tani, and that's why it didn't say it, because we do have an example. It's a halacha l'maisha misinai that if an animal, behind the trucks they have this thing that covers the tire, hangs down on the shield. Yeah, behind the tire. Otherwise, without those things, as it drives on the road, the rocks come shooting from under it, from the trunk.
Comes from smishing. Comes from this.
Yeah. So what happens is when an animal walks, when it walks fast or whatever, it could make little pebbles shoot out and cause break pottery or break things. Just from the so that's called tsreiris. Now, how much does he have to pay when that happens? We have Allah Sinai that he only pays half. But the Allah Sinai also tells me that it's mammon, that it's a real payment. It's not a fine that's imposed on him. It's an actual payment of the value. So if that's the case, then if someone admits that my animal was walking and it caused these pebbles to shoot out, you'd still have to pay. So that's why it didn't say anyone that doesn't pay the exact payment doesn't pay on his own, because there is someone that pays not the exact payment that does pay on his own. And that's when
fine is not
started.
the exact payment.
Right.
It's always the
Fine is always some just a flat.
principal actions, but the fine.
The exact payment would be the principal,
Right, yeah, exactly.
and the fine is just a flat fee that we put on.
That's what I was wondering what the difference was between.
Yeah.
Okay.
The idea of a payment is to restore the, and the idea of a fine is to get them to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. The Gemara now says, now that we've established that half a payment is considered a knas, take a look at this. Hi kal b'dachal imri. If there's a dog that ate sheep, v'shunra dachal tarnagoli, and a cat that ate roosters.
Not the other way. I kept it.
Yeah, it sounds like the Chad Gadia, right? Rav Revei, if they were large animals, like the large sheep, a large chicken, Mishunahu, then that's strange. Blame Magbinam Bavel. That would be a payment that we wouldn't take in Bavel, because that would not be it would go under the category of Keren. Keren is an abnormal damage, like we said, an ox scoring. And when the Keren is not paying the full price, because there wasn't 3 times, then it goes down to half price. Now, half price, half chatzi nezek, we said was considered a knas. And since we're in Bavel, since we're considered Bavel means that we're not in the land of Israel, we're in Babylonia. And therefore, we don't have the smicha, we don't do the knas payments. We only do the principal payments. Aval zutri, but if it was a normal thing to eat because it was small, Then orchia magbina, and then that would just be that it ate it, like it eats vegetables. It eats also small chickens or something. Vitafas, but if he grabbed it, in other words, if the victim grabbed the aggressor, we don't take it away from him. By a knas, when he takes it, you don't take it back. If we say, I want to go to Beis Din in Eretz Yisrael, okay, so we establish a time. And if the person doesn't go, we put him in Cherem. However, you should know that in the interim, we'll still put him in Cherem because because we tell him you have to get rid of your damages. And that we know from Reb Nassan, the Tanya Reb Nassan, Yigad Ladam. Kelev Ra b'teich Beisei. How do you know the person should not raise a bad dog in his house? V'layamet sulam Ra b'teich Beisei. He also shouldn't have a ladder that's not safe. There should be no blood. No place blood in the house. You're not supposed to have things in the house that are dangerous. And so if he doesn't get rid of it, they put him in Cherem as well, even before he gets there. It's Yisrael for the court case. Okay, we'll leave it over here. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much. Shkoyach.